A town at the highest point on the entire Florida peninsula woke up to blue-tarped roofs after a hurricane crossed directly overhead. A county with no coastline, no surge zone, not a single evacuation route on the map. More than 13,000 homes damaged in one storm. And the tallest named summit on the peninsula sits inside a town that markets itself as the place Florida forgot to flatten. Today, we're counting down 11 Florida towns where the deadliest part of any hurricane, the surge, simply cannot reach you. One of these towns shares its exact name with a hurricane. That storm went somewhere else entirely. And stay with us, because the number 2 spot is a name that almost nobody puts in a hurricane safety conversation, and it might have the strongest case on this whole list. Here at Sunshine State Life, we cover the Florida that the listing photos skip. The elevation numbers, the storm histories, the trade-offs your real estate agent glosses over. If that's the version you want, tap subscribe now. We put out a new one every week. All right, 11 towns. Let's start at the bottom and work up. Number 11, Dade City. About 45 minutes northeast of Tampa, Pasco County. Population around 7,300. It sits at roughly 130 feet above sea level on rolling terrain that looks genuinely, visibly nothing like the flat Gulf Coast sitting 45 miles to the west. That matters because elevation is the whole argument here. When Irma came through and when Ian came through, Dade City absorbed them as inland wind events. Rain, gusts, power flickers, not as a wall of water moving through residential streets. Picture this. You've got surge maps pulled up on your phone at midnight, and Tampa Bay is lighting up in every alarming color, and your street in Dade City isn't on any of those maps at all. That is not nothing. That is the entire point of living here. What stays with me about Dade City is how quiet the trade-off sounds until you actually think it through. You are not surge safe and storm safe. You are one, not both. Tropical storm force gusts visit. Outages that stretch for days in summer heat visit. The surge does not. And in a state where surge is what kills people, that distinction is worth buying. The wind still comes to Dade City. Count on it. Number 10, Leesburg. Lake County, about 50 minutes northwest of Orlando, population around 27,000. It sits at roughly 80 feet of elevation deep in what locals call the Golden Triangle Lake Country. And from up here, surge from either coast is simply a geographic impossibility. In 2022, Ian crossed the peninsula on a track that threatened to reach central Florida with real force. The shift in that track left Leesburg with a soggy weekend. Closed storefronts. Rain-wet streets. Not ruin. I keep coming back to that Ian track because what it demonstrated is exactly what this town's position promises on paper. That enough distance from the water means the worst of the storm often isn't the version you get. But lean in close, because Leesburg's honest catch is right there in the scenery. This is lake country. Water is visible in nearly every direction. The vulnerability here isn't the Gulf. It's what happens when a slow, wet system parks overhead and those lakes and that already saturated soil start doing the flooding themselves. Surge can't reach Leesburg. But a stubborn, rain-heavy storm doesn't need surge to cause you a problem. Safe from the Gulf. Accountable to the rain. Number 9, Winter Haven. Polk County, about 50 minutes southwest of Orlando, population around 49,200. It sits at roughly 146 feet of elevation, more than 60 miles from the Gulf, and it has earned its nickname the Chain of Lake City in the most literal possible sense. Roughly 50 lakes inside the city limits. 50. You are never not near water here, which is part of the charm and the entire complexity. From a surge standpoint, Winter Haven is as protected as a Florida city gets. The ocean cannot reach you here in any meaningful scenario. When Ian came through in 2022 and dumped 6 to 8 inches of rain on ground that was already saturated, the flooding came from the lakes, not the sea. Your living room wasn't threatened by a storm surge. It was threatened by a lake that ran out of room. That is the honest thing this town's postcard leaves out. Imagine watching the rain reports come in during a slow-moving storm and realizing that your 50 lakes, the same ones you moved here for, are what you're quietly watching. The ocean can't touch you in Winter Haven. The lakes might. Number 8, Lakeland, the biggest town on this list. Polk County, about 30 minutes east of Tampa, population around 112,600. It averages close to 190 feet above sea level and sits squarely between both coasts, out of surge range from either direction. On paper, That is an almost ideal inland position. And then August 13th, 2004 enters the record. Hurricane Charley cut directly across Polk County on that date, and Lakeland absorbed a genuine hurricane's wind load. Not a glancing blow, not a weakened remnant, not a tropical storm. The real thing came to town and reminded everyone on high inland ground of the one thing elevation cannot buy. I'll be honest, that date is the reason Lakeland isn't higher on this list. It proves the core lesson of this entire countdown. 190 feet of elevation purchases you exactly one form of protection and wind, isn't it? You bought inland, you bought high, and Charley found you anyway. Your surge risk is genuinely low in Lakeland. Your wind risk on an August afternoon when a fast-moving storm cuts across the peninsula? Charley answered that already. 190 feet up. Charley didn't care. Coming up next, we just watched the biggest town on this list absorb a direct hurricane hit. Still ahead is a spot that looks, on pure geography, like the absolute safest address in all of Florida. Until one September permanently complicated that story. Number 7, Sebring, Highlands County, the geographic center of the state, roughly 90 miles from either coast in every direction. Population around 10,900, sitting at about 138 feet of elevation with no evacuation zone anywhere near it. Pull up a Florida map and put your finger right in the middle. That is approximately where Sebring is. The logic of choosing this town for storm safety is almost airtight. Almost. Then September 2017 happens. Hurricane Irma's wind field was wide enough to reach the exact center of the Florida peninsula and treat it like a coastal county. Highlands County came out of Irma as one of the hardest hit in the entire state. More than 13,000 homes affected, in a county with no coastline, no surge zone, no evacuation map. What I keep coming back to with Sebring is what that number, 13,000 homes, does to the argument that distance alone is safety. Distance from the coast shields you from surge. It does not shield you from a storm broad enough to carry destructive wind from one coast to the other without losing its grip. Sebring is still a more sheltered address than anything along the Gulf or Atlantic, but the middle of Florida is not the safe middle of the argument. Number 6, Brooksville, Hernando County, about an hour north of Tampa, population around 8,900. This is one of the hilliest towns in Florida, genuinely, visibly hilly in a way that stops visitors who drove up from Tampa Flat. It sits on the Brooksville Ridge, with Chinsagat Hill rising to around 269 feet nearby. That terrain is why Brooksville carries no coastal surge evacuation zone. You are on a ridge. The Gulf is miles below you in more ways than one. When Hurricane Idalia struck the Nature Coast in August 2023, the coastal side of Hernando County took the hit hard. Brooksville sat on the ridge and watched the damage reports roll in from the waterfront towns below. The hills were doing their job. Mostly. Because here is the trade-off this town makes. Brooksville sits closer to the Gulf than the deeper ridge towns to its south. It trades some of that safety margin for the character and the scenery of those famous hills. The ridge gives you meaningful protection. It does not give you the same insulation that a town sitting 90 miles from either coast gets. The highest town on the Nature Coast. Still not quite far enough to call it bulletproof. Number 5, Lake Wales, Polk County, about an hour south of Orlando, near the geographic center of the peninsula, population around 16,400. This is where the list gets literal. Lake Wales sits beside Iron Mountain on the Lake Wales Ridge, and at roughly 298 feet, that is the highest ground on the entire Florida peninsula. The Census Bureau has placed Florida's population center in this vicinity. Bach Tower Gardens crowns Iron Mountain, a landmark sitting at the literal high point of the state. You can stand there and understand, at least geographically, why someone would choose this address for storm safety. You are as high as peninsular Florida gets. You are near the center of the state. There is no surge scenario that reaches you here. And then Hurricane Charley crossed directly overhead in 2004 and left Lake Wales a city of blue-tarped roofs. That is the number I'd argue about most on this entire list. The highest, most central ground in Florida, and Charley still found it. What that tells you is not that Lake Wales is a bad choice. Surge will never threaten this address, and that is a permanent, geometric truth. What it tells you is that altitude is only a shield against one thing. Charley came for the wind, and the wind does not check your elevation before it arrives. The peak of Florida. Charley still found it. Number 4, Mount Dora, the one with the name. Lake County, about 40 minutes northwest of Orlando, population around 14,000. It sits on a plateau at roughly 184 feet of elevation, a lakeside town of hills and antique shops that looks and feels nothing like the flat, coastal image most people carry of Florida. It is well inland from either coast, nowhere near a surge zone, and it carries a piece of Florida storm history that is genuinely strange when you sit with it. Hurricane Dora, an actual named storm, came ashore in 1964 up on the northeast coast near St. Augustine. It never struck the town that shares its name. Mount Dora, the place, was spared by Mount Dora, the storm. You live in a town named for a hurricane that went somewhere else entirely and left you alone. That is the kind of detail this channel exists to tell you. What the postcard doesn't mention is that Mount Dora still absorbs tropical storm winds, downed trees, and days-long outages when any system tracks through central Florida. No elevation, no inland position, no lucky naming history removes that from the equation. Named for a hurricane, spared by one, no guarantees after that. Still ahead, the inland city that fills up with coastal evacuees every storm season, and the name at number 2 that almost nobody puts on a list like this one. Number 3, Ocala. Marion County, about 90 minutes northwest of Orlando, population around 63,600, the horse capital of the world. It sits at about 75 feet of elevation, roughly 50 miles from the nearest Gulf water, and it is entirely off the surge and evacuation maps, which is exactly why it does something no other town on this list does. When a storm threatens the Gulf Coast, the evacuation routes point toward Ocala. The signs on the highways aim inward, toward this town, not away from it. Picture this. You're watching a storm track develop over the Gulf on a Tuesday, and by Thursday, your town is absorbing the coastal county's populations along with the wind. You stay. The coast comes to you. That is Ocala's position in the Florida storm ecosystem, and it tells you something real about the safety margin this address provides. Then Irma arrived in 2017 and reached Marion County as tropical storm force wind. Even that. Not a hurricane, a weakened system passing through. Knocked out power to around 140,000 customers here. That is the honest turn on Ocala. Inland safety still comes with heat, wind, and long, dark stretches. The surge doesn't reach this town. The outage does, where the coast runs to. Still not a free pass. Number 2, Gainesville. Alachua County, about an hour and a half north of Orlando, population around 141,000, a college town. The University of Florida is here, and it is almost certainly not the name you had in mind when you clicked on a video about hurricane-safe Florida towns, which is exactly the point. I'll be honest, Gainesville may have the strongest single claim on this list, and almost no one in the retirement conversation ever says its name. It sits roughly 120 miles from both the Atlantic and the Gulf. It registers at around 120 feet of elevation in flood zone X. In September 2017, Hurricane Irma's center passed just west of the city, and by the time it arrived, Irma had weakened to a tropical storm. That is the weather record for one of the largest storms to threaten this state in decades, and Gainesville experienced it as a tropical storm. Your practical reality in Gainesville is this. You sit well above sea level, more than 100 miles from any open water, watching a major storm on radar and knowing it will reach you diminished. Then you ride out hours of tropical storm wind and tree damage anyway. That is the trade-off the safest big address in the state offers. Not immunity. Inconvenience instead of devastation. A college town of 141,000 people with a storm record that most coastal retirees would trade for in a second. The most hurricane-safe big city in Florida. Nobody talks about it. Number 1, Clermont, Lake County, about 30 minutes west of Orlando. Population around 43,000. And this is the town the whole list has been building toward, because Clermont delivers the specific combination that every other entry on this countdown approached but never quite completed. Real Florida high ground within easy reach of a major city with a storm record that holds up. The town itself sits on a ridge at about 151 feet. Just outside town, Sugarloaf Mountain rises to roughly 312 feet. The most prominent summit on the Florida peninsula, in a landscape of hills so unlike the rest of the state that locals have made the place Florida forgot to flatten the unofficial slogan. You are more than 60 miles from any storm surge, and the elevation puts hundreds of feet of vertical distance between your address and the highest water any hurricane could push inland. When Charley crossed the region, it arrived as wind and rain. When Ian crossed the region, same story. Neither delivered surge to Clermont. That is the through line on this town's storm history, and it is the through line on this entire list. Here is the thing I want to be precise about, because this channel does not deal in false promises. The wind still comes to Clermont. It comes to every town on this list. Nothing in Florida is hurricane-proof, and no script we put out will ever tell you otherwise. What Clermont offers. What it alone on this list offers, together with actual city infrastructure and proximity to Orlando, is the one guarantee the coastline will never hand you. The surge will not reach your door. Not because you got lucky in one storm, because the physics of the state make it impossible. You watch the surge maps fill in along the Gulf and the Atlantic, you watch the evacuation orders go out, and your address never appears. That is what you are buying in Clermont. Not safety from everything. Safety from the one thing that ends neighborhoods overnight. The place Florida forgot to flatten. And the one promise this whole list is built on. There is a spine of high, inland ground running through this state where the deadliest part of a hurricane, the surge, simply runs out of reach, and every town on this list lives on it. Some of them proved it in 2004. Some proved it in 2017 and 2022. All of them are still standing. If this video gave you something useful, go ahead and hit like. It gets this in front of more people trying to make this exact decision. And subscribe to the channel so you catch what's next. We're going to look at the Florida zip codes where flood insurance is quietly eating retirement budgets alive, even miles from the coast. That one matters whether you're inland or not. Which of these towns surprised you most? And if you rode out a storm in any of them, tell us in the comments what it was actually like.